Since 1934, Iowa's farmers have turned to the Iowa Farm Bureau Spokesman as their trusted news source. Now, the Spokesman speaks. Listen in and hear from leading experts on topics important to farmers and agriculture. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to the September 7th edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm Andrew Wheeler, and in today's episode, you're going to learn about Iowa DOT's rules and exceptions for farmers this harvest season. And you'll hear from an Eastern Iowa farm celebrity who welcomed Burger King executives onto her farm to learn the truth about the sustainability of agriculture after Burger King ran an ad mischaracterizing the environmental impact of cattle. I'm guessing that a few of you are filling up a truckload of grain as you're listening to this episode. So let's start with Iowa DOT officer Sergeant Kevin Kilpack, who recently called in to discuss DOT's rules and exceptions for farmers with Spokesman reporter Corey Munson.
This year, starting July 1st, we had some rule changes regarding the use and who can be operating a farm vehicle. So can you explain to us what exactly in the state of Iowa is considered a farm vehicle?
I sure can. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of talk about the federal code. And in the state of Iowa, we've adopted the federal code. And under that federal code, there's definitions for different types of items. The item that we're talking about today has to do with what is a covered farm vehicle. And that definition is actually found in 390.5 of the federal code, and it defines what a covered farm vehicle is. And there's some criteria that has to be met. And first, it identifies what type of vehicle it can be. And a covered farm vehicle can be either a straight truck or an articulated truck like a truck, tractor, semi-trailer. One of the other criteria that they have to meet to be a covered farm vehicle is it has to be registered in a state with a license plate or other designation issued by the state of Iowa that the registration that will allow law enforcement to understand and identify that this is a commercial motor vehicle or a covered farm vehicle. Iowa allows this designation to be done by having the word special indicated on the side of the plate. It could have a farm sticker, or you can get from either the county treasurer's office or Iowa DOT, you can get a covered farm vehicle designation letter. And that's how we, as law enforcement, would be able to identify that we're dealing with a covered farm vehicle. Some of the other criteria that have to be met is the operators of that vehicle have to be the owner or operator of a farm or ranch, or an employee or a family member of an owner or operator of the farm and ranch. This vehicle can be used to transport agricultural commodities, livestock, machinery, or supplies to and from the farm or ranch. One of the caveats to this is that you could meet all these criteria, but in order to keep that definition and maintain the benefits of it, the vehicle cannot be used in a for-hire operation, such as you can't go to the co-op and haul for hire or get paid so much per bushel to haul someone else's grain and be compensated for it. What it doesn't do is it doesn't prohibit a farmer entering into a crop sharing agreement with their landlord. You can still haul your landlord's grain as long as it's part of a crop sharing agreement. The other caveat is that you can't haul amount of hazardous materials that would require placarding. So once we've established all this, the size of the commercial motor vehicle determines the distance restrictions in which you can travel in this covered farm vehicle. So in the smaller vehicles, let's talk about a vehicle with a gross vehicle weight or gross vehicle weight rating of 26,001 pounds or less. They can utilize the exceptions within this covered farm vehicle designation anywhere in the United States. So that's for the smaller vehicles. If you're in a larger vehicle with a gross vehicle weight or gross vehicle weight rating, whichever is greater, of more than 26,001 pounds, you can utilize these exceptions anywhere within the state of registration. Or if you live in Iowa and you want to cross state lines, you can go up to 150 air miles from your farm or ranch with respect to the vehicle that's being operated.
So if you meet the criteria for being a covered farm vehicle, what benefits does that afford you as the operator?
So in the commercial federal regulations, there's a code section in 390.39 that talks about exceptions for covered farm vehicles. And when we read that, it tells us that if you meet the definition of the size, the usage of the vehicle, and the distance limitations, you could potentially be accepted from CDO requirements. You would also be accepted from drug and alcohol testing. Another exception afforded to farmers and covered farm vehicles would be the age restriction and the physical requirements found under 391. Typically, a commercial motor vehicle operator has to be 21 to operate interstate commerce. So what this does, this exception allows farmers or their family members or their hired helpers to operate this vehicle at the age of 18 and older, but not being held to the 21-year-old age restriction. It also accepts you from hours of service, so you wouldn't have to carry a logbook as long as you stay within those mileage restrictions, and you wouldn't have to keep track of any of your time records. The last thing that you'd be accepted from would have to be inspection, repair, and maintenance, which is found under 396, which means that the farmers or the farmers' vehicles don't have to have an annual vehicle safety inspection.
So now that we've defined what a farm vehicle is, depending on the use of that vehicle, who can operate the covered farm vehicle and what licensing is required?
So the Code of Iowa has actually changed effective July 1st, and they did some things that were quite beneficial to farmers. And what they've said is that if you are operating a covered farm vehicle and you're doing it as either the owner or operator of the farm or ranch or an employee or family member of that farmer ranch, they're going to do some exceptions that allow you to not only not have to have a Class A CDL, but you may be accepted from a chauffeur's license as well. So let's go over some of the examples of who's accepted under what circumstances and under what distance restrictions. So to start off, let's say you're operating a truck, tractor, semi-trailer, and you have a gross vehicle weight rating of 26,000 pounds or more, and you have a trailer over 10,000 pounds, you are operating a covered farm vehicle. If you operate that vehicle within 100 air miles of your farm and you're 18 years or older, you can do that now on an operator's license. So there's no more going to the treasurer's office and having to get a chauffeur's license for those covered farm vehicles operating within 100 air miles of the farm. If you chose to operate beyond 100 air miles and you stayed within the state borders of Iowa, you would then need the chauffeur's license, but only over 100 air miles from your farm. So a couple of examples of that would be, say you live in, your farm's in Keokuk and you want to go to Sioux City in your covered farm vehicle, and you're obviously staying within the state of Iowa, you would need that chauffeur's license. Or another example would be as if you wanted to drive from Council Bluffs to Davenport in your covered farm vehicle. Again, you would only need the chauffeur's D1 license. Now let's give an example. I live in western Iowa, I live in Logan, and we're pretty close to the Nebraska border. And say my farm is in Logan, and I wanted to go to the west, and I wanted to go into Nebraska, and I exceeded 150 air miles, I would then need a Class A CDL. So operating outside of state, exceeding 150 air miles, that's when the covered farm vehicle would then be required to have a Class A CDL. We haven't touched on the smaller vehicles yet, but if you're driving a covered farm vehicle with a gross vehicle weight rating of 26,001 pounds or less, the federal rules have allowed you to do this with a Class C operator's license anywhere in the United States. So that's a huge benefit for farmers today.
So what rule changes came into effect here on July 1st?
There were really two significant rule changes that came into effect July 1st when we talk about the Code of Iowa. The first one we've already talked about, meaning the chauffeur's exception. The other significant rule change for the Code of Iowa has to do with hauling hay and the exception from having to have an over-dimensional permit. So what the Code of Iowa has done is they said that if you're hauling a load of hay, straw, stover, or bagged livestock bedding, you no longer need an over-dimensional permit as long as you do not exceed 12 feet 5 inches wide or you do not exceed 14 feet 6 inches high, and you still have to weigh 80,000 pounds or less, and you still have to comply with your axle weights, but as long as you stay within those dimensions, you no longer have to have an oversized permit. So one caveat to this is that projecting loads still requires flags, even though you're accepted from the overdimensional permit. And one other thing that I want to point out is if you're going to haul an overdimensional load after dark, you still need to have lights on the extremities of that load.
So I know there are some requirements for what a vehicle must carry, both in paperwork as well as safety equipment when you're traveling within the state as opposed to across state lines. Can you tell me a little bit about the differences there?
So if you're operating a commercial motor vehicle, and the definition in the federal rules of a commercial motor vehicle is exceeding 10,000 pounds, operating in interstate commerce or potentially intrastate commerce, what do you need? So if you're operating a commercial motor vehicle and you're staying within the state, you're going to need registration cards, your insurance card, you're going to need a fire extinguisher and triangles, and you're going to need to have a valid driver's license. And really, it's pretty simple to operate intrastate. It's when you go out of state when there's more requirements that are applicable to you when you operate a commercial motor vehicle interstate. So to answer that question, what do I need when traveling in interstate commerce? To start off, you're going to need a U.S. DOT number, and that's applicable to private or for hire motor carriers. It doesn't matter. Both carriers are going to need a U.S. DOT number. You would need a unified carrier registration. You would need fire extinguisher and triangles. If your vehicle is large enough, you would need an international fuel tax agreement. And when I talk about the size, the qualifications are is you have to be registered for more than 13 ton or have more than 3 or more axles on the power unit. Covered farm vehicles are going to be accepted from the International Registration Plan, so you can run your covered farm vehicle plates on there. You're going to need a valid driver's license, potentially a CDL if you go far enough beyond that 150 air mile radius. If you exceed 150 air mile radius, you're going to need a medical card. And if you exceed that same 150 mile air radius from your farm, you're going to need to have some hours of service as well. We've talked about being accepted from annual vehicle inspections. You are, as long as you're within that 150 air mile radius. Once you exceed that, you're going to need some annual vehicle inspections and the medical card as well once you exceed that 150. So really, staying within 150 air miles of your farm has some significant benefits, but on the event that you do need to exceed that, those are the requirements necessary to meet.
So it sounds like there's a variety of rules that need to be followed whenever operating one of these covered farm vehicles. Can you tell us where folks can go to find this information from the state as well as the federal, and maybe who they can call if they need more information?
One of my favorite resources that I give to truck drivers and farmers is our motor vehicle enforcement has authored a book called the Iowa Truck Information Guide. And really what this has done, it has condensed many of the rules that are applicable to people operating trucks and commercial motor vehicles and covered farm vehicles within Iowa and interstate commerce, and has condensed it into an easy-to-read book that can be downloaded on the internet. Rather than spell out the actual web address, I think the easiest thing to do to find this would be just to go to your favorite search engine and type in Iowa Truck Information Guide. And you can download it, you can view it online, and it's just a PDF version that condenses these rules, and it has it in a logical thought process, and it is quite easy to read. And if you do have questions that you still have unanswered, we have another way to contact motor vehicle enforcement, and that internet address is iowa.dot.gov/MVE/contact-us. And it's a nice, easy way. It brings up a map of the state of Iowa. It's got it broken into 6 different sections, 6 different captains areas, and you can click on the area that you live in, and you can send an email to the area captain and sergeants, and you can put that in email format, and we will either contact you back by email, or if it's a more complex question that needs more clarification, we'll give you a phone call and we'll sit down and visit, and we'll talk about it till you understand what's needed.
We appreciate that timely update from the Iowa DOT. If you'd like to get your hands on the Iowa Truck Information Guide that Sergeant Kilpack referenced, or the link to contact a DOT officer in your area, We've included links to both of those resources in the notes for this podcast episode. Okay, time to completely switch gears from transportation to sustainability. At the beginning of this episode, I mentioned a recent Burger King ad that completely missed the mark on the topic of cattle and sustainability. That ad did not sit well with farmers, including Eastern Iowa farmer and social media influencer Michelle Miller, who's known by her social media followers as the Farm Babe. Michelle took action, inviting Burger King executives to tour her farm, along with a few other farms and ag locations in the area, to see and experience the cycle that makes livestock farms sustainable. Iowa Farm Bureau was honored to lend a hand, and I was even there in person for day 2 of the tour. But I don't want to give away too much more. Farm Bureau's Zach Bader has the story with the Farm Babe, Michelle Miller.
I'm happy to be joined by Michelle Miller, also known as the Farm Babe. And Michelle, thanks for joining us on the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm sure that a lot of our listeners are familiar with you, but for those who don't know your story or your background, can you give us a high-level overview of just how it is that you became the Farm Babe?
Sure. Yeah. So again, my name is Michelle Miller. I am coming from a farm in northeast Iowa. We raise beef cattle and sheep, grow corn, soybeans, alfalfa, oats, hay, rye, all sorts of good stuff. And I use social media as a platform to bridge the gap between consumers and farmers. I'm a weekly columnist on agdaily.com and normally a public speaker, which obviously the conference industry is shut down with COVID, but that's normally what I'm doing, and just work to be an advocate and a public voice for our industry.
And how did you get to this point where you've got the platform and brand that you have today?
You know, I had just been really fed up with hearing so much misinformation out there about agriculture. I started my page, Farm Babe, about 5.5 years ago, and it was after I had discovered this food blogger named the Food Babe. And she was spreading so much misinformation, and I just kind of got fed up with it after I was banned and blocked from her social media platforms. And I said, you know, if the Food Babe is not going to let farmers talk about farming, I'm just going to start the Farm Babe, which was a way to tell the real, truthful story about agriculture. And it's just grown exponentially ever since. And yeah, it's just it's been pretty cool to see it happen, about how advocating for agriculture can turn into a full-time career in doing what we love, which is farming, but sharing that story of farming too.
Okay, so I think by now most farmers know about Burger King's recent commercial on methane and cattle, and I think that bizarre is probably the kindest way that you could describe it. It features kids yodeling about how methane emissions from cattle is a problem and how Burger King is reducing those emissions by feeding lemongrass to cattle. Never mind the fact that cattle actually have a relatively small environmental footprint, and in fact, I've seen a stat that if you got rid of all livestock and poultry in the U.S., you'd only reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by 0.36%. So we're already talking about a small environmental footprint that's actually getting smaller. So when you first saw the Burger King ad, what was your initial reaction, Michelle?
Oh my God! I did throw my phone across the room. I couldn't finish it. I was so mad. And then I went back to it, and it's like, do you ever send one of those emails or one of those texts where you like write it all off and you're really angry, but then you like think about it for a second and you delete it all and say like, okay, I feel better since I let it out, but you don't actually hit send. I had a lot of choice words. But after I actually was able to stomach it and watch the whole thing, I just sent out a few tweets and tweeted their chief marketing officer, just talking about what a slap in the face it was. You know, I mean, farmers I think we already in our industry feel very underappreciated and misunderstood. And so, that's kind of how it all went down, was just to send out a tweet to him. And that's kind of how it all started, to get the ball rolling with conversation.
So how did that tweet result in an invitation to your farm?
Well, their PR people, Burger King's PR people, reached out to me and arranged a Zoom call with Fernando Machado, who's the chief marketing officer of Burger King, and we had a Zoom call. And I just explained to him, why we found that ad so offensive. And in hindsight, he was kind of like, well, he had never thought of it that way. I don't think that he genuinely felt that the ad would be offensive, and I don't think they really thought about the people and the farmers behind cattle that were real people who care about the planet. And so that's kind of how it all started. And I said, look, if you want to see the truth of sustainability, come on out to the farm. And much to my pleasant surprise, they did. And so it was great. And I'm thankful, to you guys, the Iowa Farm Bureau, for being a part of this and helping me kind of put some interviews together. I know you did a great job helping with that and getting the proper people out here with a good team to tell the solid story of that. So, yeah, we had a really good, diverse group, and they filmed the whole thing, and they sent over the preliminary video, which has not yet been released to the public. They wanted to run it by me first so I would approve it. And now it's in their legal. So once it goes through all the Burger King legal mumbo-jumbo, and it looks like they will be releasing a video to highlight the truth and the real story of sustainability and give farmers a voice. So I'm very, very pleased with how it went.
So what do you think were some of the moments? I was kind of there following along virtually, and as you said, our PR manager was there as well. And it was kind of cool to hear about how they weren't just hearing about sustainability, they were also able to see it and in a sense also experience it. They even had a chance to feed the cattle on your farm. So what were some of the aha moments attached to that experiential side of things that you think maybe opened their minds to how farmers are protecting the environment, how technology does result in improved sustainability and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it is about building relationships and, getting to know each other. And I tried to have a really broad roster of people there, So I think getting to know, my friend Kim Bremer, who is a ruminant nutritionist, it's 15 years, and she was like a dairy cow nutritionist on farms, and she's very knowledgeable in that respect. You had Dr. Dan Thompson from Iowa State, animal science professor. Bob Powell is the CEO of Brightmark. I think, for them to see renewable energy can come from, livestock manure, where we are all, I think farmers were mitigating their environmental footprint and trapping methane before it was cool, before they did the video. And so I think that was a big one, where they could kind of see, 90,000 gallons of manure, methane trapped and turned into renewable natural gas to power local homes and businesses. We're literally powering homes with poop from cows. It's so cool, right? So I think that was a big one. And then just seeing, how different farmers do things differently. On our farm, we're pretty a mid-size kind of old school farm. But then I showed them, a large-scale cattle feedlot that's just got thousands of head of beef cattle and much more technology and nicer infrastructure and, just a much bigger, broader way of doing things, mixing feed mechanically with their nice hydraulic chutes and everything like that we don't have on our farm, but plenty of farms do. So I just wanted to showcase different agriculture of different shapes and sizes that mostly would pertain to Burger King's kind of scale, Like, I didn't want to take them to like a 5-acre hobby farm, right? Because that's probably not where Burger King would source their beef. But things that were attainable and relatable to their business and sustainability, I think was a great conversation.
You've already kind of alluded to one of these things, but what kind of evidence have you seen that they got the message, that it got through to them, that they were open to learning and they're applying some of what they're learning to hopefully improve their future approach to sustainability and marketing?
The videos, the fact that they filmed it all and they're doing a video to highlight agriculture. They've also been a guest. I know Fernando was a guest on another What the Farm podcast recently, I think Rob Sharkey can be kind of good at putting people in the hot seat. So there was that. And I think just having other people take wind of the situation and, just continue to have those dialogues. I think we had so many great conversations. I think the other thing too is kind of traceability, I think is a trend that we could be seeing, where they're kind of like, I think beef cattle farmers, we don't always know where our cattle goes. And big corporations like Burger King don't always know where it comes from, so how can we bridge that traceability and make people feel connected and feel good about the food that they're purchasing? And so, I think there was a lot of really great things that could come of it, and I think this is just the start of, relationship building and see where it goes.
It sounds like there are lessons here that could be applied beyond this very specific situation working with Burger King. So as you were going through this experience, what did it maybe teach you or remind you in the moment about the opportunity that we have to work with other food brands and consumers moving forward?
Just to always kind of put yourself in other people's shoes and have empathy. There's some skeptics out there when he and I started talking. I think some people didn't want to forgive. And I said, hold on a minute. You have to put yourself in other people's shoes. The people that did the ad, they're in New York City, they're in Miami, they're not exposed to farmers. And so it's just, you have to remember that, just because they put out an ad that we found offensive doesn't necessarily mean that their intentions were bad. Why would they want to, if they're in the business of burgers, why would they want to piss off the people that that raise burgers? That would be pretty contradictory. So, just remember that it only takes one voice. You can be that voice and you can make a difference. All it took for me was a tweet. And together as an industry, if we can remember to just, like I mentioned earlier, as upset I was the first time I saw it, just take a deep breath and think about it for a minute and, respond with tact and class and put yourself in their shoes and realize that, we have to be able to come to the table and learn from each other and move forward. You're never going to win anybody over by being a jerk. And so, overall, I think it's been a really successful turnaround thus far.
You've really got to hand it to Michelle. We've faced so much frustration in 2020 that it would have been easy to just throw up our hands and write off Burger King as another food company that just doesn't get it. Instead, Michelle decided to open up her farm and start a dialogue, and we're so glad she chose to involve us in that discussion as well. Well, that just about wraps up this episode of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. But before you go, we'd like to remind you that we released a special podcast episode on August 28th with tips for managing crops damaged by Iowa's derecho storm this summer. That's episode 50, which was released on August 28th. You can find that episode in your favorite podcast app, and while you're there, be sure to subscribe to the Spokesman Speaks podcast and binge any episodes you've missed. And by subscribing, you'll never miss a future episode, including our next regularly scheduled podcast episode on September 21st. Until next time, I hope that you have had a safe and successful start to the 2020 harvest. Thanks for reading The Spokesman, and thanks for listening to The Spokesman Speaks.
Thank you for listening to The Spokesman Speaks, a podcast by Iowa Farm Bureau. Check out more podcasts and articles from The Spokesman at iowafarmbureau.com/spokesman. You can also find and subscribe to the Spokesman Speaks podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, and other popular podcast apps. We appreciate your ratings and reviews and welcome your feedback at podcast@ifbf.org.